The first man entered, calling her name with a tone too smooth to be friendly. Mara Cade. We're here to extract you orders from High Command. She didn't answer. Thalen crouched behind the rubble, his massive hands ready. The man stepped closer, smiling. Under his visor, he said, "Your new friend is quite valuable. Imagine what we can learn from that link." Mara acted first. She threw a flash charge across the floor. It exploded in white fire and the ambush began. Thalen moved like thunder, his massive body a wall between her and the attackers. His strike broke the first man's rifle in half before he could fire. She dove to cover, returning burst from her carbine. The confined space turned the fight into chaos, sparks and smoke filling the air. The bond kept them moving as one. Every time she aimed, he shifted to clear her line. Every time he struck, she saw the opening through his senses. 2 soldiers went down, 3. Then the rest fell back, shouting for reinforcements before they could regroup. Thalen slammed a fist into the wall, opening a path into the next corridor. They ran through the smoke toward an old control chamber. Mara sealed the door behind them, panting. She could hear Thalen's pulse inside her mind, fast and ragged. She said, "We can't keep running," he answered. "Not running, moving," she frowned. "What's the difference?" he said. "Running is when you flee from meaning. Moving is when you seek it." She didn't answer, but the words stayed with her. In the control chamber they found a half-intact data core still humming with power. Thalen touched the console and the system flickered to life in a blur of alien and human script. Mara linked her pad and began dumping logs. Whatever this place had recorded, she hoped it might give them leverage maps, troop movements, anything. But what appeared instead froze her breath. Ancient images of murals and mixed ranks, human and giant, fighting side by side under the same banner. The translator labeled the files, Cooperation Pact dated, centuries before the current war existed. Thalen leaned closer, disbelief and sorrow mingling in his thoughts. This cannot be. He said my people would never forget such a thing. She said apparently someone wanted both of us to forget. The alarm sirens broke the moment apart. Their pursuers had breached the outer door. Mara pulled the core free and slung it across her shoulder. Thalen opened a side hatch to the drainage tunnels below. The air reeked of chemical waste, but it was a way out. They crawled through knee-deep sludge until the tunnel split into 2 paths. He paused, listening. The bond told her he was reading vibrations above their heads. "Soldiers everywhere, no clear exit," she said. "We need to disappear." He nodded and said, "Then we go down." The shaft dropped hundreds of feet into darkness. They slid and fell, scraping metal and cold stone until they landed in a cavern lit by bioluminescent moss. The glow painted the walls with ghostly blue and green reflections. Thalen looked around, awe and memory crossing his face. "This place," he whispered, "was once a meeting ground between our species." She felt the same echo from the bond fragments of past voices, laughter of humans and giants sharing food, stories of peace, gone long before their birth. For a moment they stood in the strange quiet, breathing the same damp air. Then a voice echoed through the tunnel speakers overhead, telling them, "Surrender, both of you, or die where you stand." She looked at Thalen and saw the decision form before. He spoke, his eyes steady, the bond pulsing between them. "We will not die here." He said, "Not before the truth is known." Mara nodded, gripping her rifle tighter. "We show them what it means to fight together." And with that, they ran deeper into the dark, pursued by enemies from both sides, but carrying a secret that could burn the whole war open. The tunnels twisted downward until they reached a vault that smelled of rust and forgotten air. Each step echoed through a place built for something ancient. Mara could sense Thalen's pulse through the bond, steady but strained. They had been walking for hours with little food and no map, and the sound of the hunters above had faded, only to be replaced by a new silence that felt alive. The aliens' echo sense rippled again. He stopped and said, "We are not alone." She gripped her rifle, though she doubted bullets would help against whatever lived in this buried place. The walls were carved with symbols, part human, part alien language. Both worn, smooth by time, she brushed the dust away and found a mural showing figures standing together, one small and one tall, their hands raised toward a shared sun. She looked at Thalen, who stared at the same image, his voice low. "My ancestors called this the Chamber of Oaths." She asked, "You knew this was here?" He said, "No, I dreamed it last night through the bond. Perhaps the bond guides us." They found a sealed door of dark metal covered in vines of old wiring. Mara pressed her hand against it, and it pulsed faintly in response like a living thing. She felt heat in her chest, the bond reacting. Thalen placed his hand beside hers, and the seal split with a low hum. The door opened to reveal a round chamber filled with dead machines and one faintly glowing sphere suspended above a pedestal. Its surface shifting like liquid light when she approached it flared, and a projection appeared. A voice ancient and layered. Speaking in both languages at once, it said, "Record of Unity. Treaty between the first human envoy and the Brood clans established for mutual survival in the Age of Collapse." Thalen's breath caught. "My kind denied this history, and yours did too," she whispered, and the bond burned brighter between them as if echoing the truth. The voice continued, "Fragments only, but enough to shatter everything." They thought they knew. It spoke of a time when both species shared technology and bloodlines, when soldiers of both sides took the same vows, and when a betrayal by leaders erased that unity to rebuild the war economy. The last line was barely audible. "Those who remember must hide until the bond is born again." Then the light dimmed, leaving them in silence. Mara said, "This changes everything." Thalen nodded, but his expression darkened. "It changes nothing. If we die before we tell them." They both knew that the data core on her back held proof now, and that every faction would kill to control it. They left the chamber and found an access tunnel leading upward toward an old communications tower, half collapsed but still reaching the surface. Mara said, "If we can reach that array, we can transmit this to every channel on both sides and end the lies." Thalen's jaw tightened. "They will come," she said. "Let them come." They climbed for hours through metal shafts and jagged stone until daylight finally split the darkness. They emerged onto a plateau overlooking the ruins of two camps, one human, one alien. Both burned during early battles. The wind carried the smell of old fire, and the sky was streaked with red dust. Thalen scanned the horizon and said, "We are being watched." She could feel it too, the bond vibrating like a warning before the first shot cracked across the ridge. They dove for cover as sniper rounds tore through the ground. Mara rolled behind a rock outcrop and checked her pad. They had been tagged through satellite tracking. The bounty on their heads had gone out across both armies. She said, "They will not stop until we are ashes." Thalen said, "Then we move." Faster, they sprinted through open ground, using debris as cover the shots chasing them, until they reached the tower at its base. She hacked through the old locks while Thalen tore a fallen girder aside. They slipped inside and sealed the hatch above them. The interior was a skeleton of broken panels and shattered screens, but the transmitter dish still clung to the spire like a scar. She started rerouting power using cables from her suit while Thalen stood guard. When the power came alive, the whole tower moaned with static. She began uploading the files, the ancient recordings, the mural images, and the audio of the treaty. But halfway through, the signal jammed. A digital intrusion burned across the screen and the system froze. She cursed. Under her breath, "Black cell, they traced us before the upload finished." The speakers crackled and a calm voice came through saying, "You should have taken our offer." Cade Thalen recognized it as the man who led the ambush in the dome they surrounded. "The tower with drones and drop units." The voice continued, "Step out and surrender, and we will let the giant live resist, and we erase you both." Mara muted the channel. She looked at Thalen and said, "They can't get this data, or the truth dies again." He said, "Then we make sure they do not take it." The attack began with explosions shaking the base of the tower. Debris rained down. Mara ran to the upper platform and began transferring the files into the emergency beacon, one that could fire straight into orbit. It would take a full minute to charge. She aimed the antenna while Thalen moved below, smashing drones with chunks of metal, his movements heavy but precise. Each hit felt through the bond, echoing in her muscles. The beacon's charge climbed, 70%, 80. The hatch blew inward, a team of commandos storming through. She fired short bursts, forcing them back. One bullet clipped her arm, but she didn't feel pain. Only the heat of adrenaline shared through the link. Thalen roared and leapt onto the stairwell, his massive frame crushing the metal. He fought with brutal precision, blocking the soldier's path. Mara heard the beacon reach full charge. She slammed the release switch. The tower's top flared with a beam of white. light piercing the red sky, carrying their message, their proof, their truth to every satellite still awake on the network. The files were gone beyond reach. Safe, now the commandos realized too late and opened fire again. One shot caught Thalen in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He fell but pulled a support beam with him, collapsing the stairs and trapping the attackers below. She ran down through the smoke and reached him kneeling beside the massive figure, his breath shallow. He looked at her and said, "It is done." She said, "Not yet, help me move," but his hand caught hers, his voice faint. "They will see now, they will know." The tower groaned, the structure failing under the bombardment. Mara dragged him toward the exit, but the bond burned through her body. She could feel his strength fading, her own heart skipping to match his rhythm. He whispered something in his language, words she didn't know, but felt through emotion, pride, sorrow, and hope. She said, "Don't you dare die on me." And he smiled, a slow, tired smile, saying, "The bond is more than life or death, it is memory." Then his eyes closed. The bond dimmed, but did not break. She carried him out as the tower began to collapse. The beam still shining high. Above, across the planet, everyone would see the truth and the name Mara. Cade, bonded soldier of Earth, and Thalen of the First Brood would become a story that could not be buried again. The blast from the tower's transmitter had sent a pulse of light across the war zone, and Mara could feel the tension in the air like static on her skin. The files were out now, and every soldier on both sides had access to the truth. But that did not mean the fighting would stop. Thalen stirred beside her, massive form bruised and bloodied yet unbroken. He looked up with eyes like storm clouds. Mara whispered. "We did it," but his gaze went past her, scanning the horizon, and she understood he could see what she could not. The enemy commanders had already taken notice. The brigadier, whose voice had haunted her comms all these weeks, barked orders to intercept them, and a rival giant warlord named Viel had appeared over the ridge, his armor black and scarred, the emblem of betrayal clear for all to see. Mara knew immediately the weight of what was coming. They had shown the truth, but the world was not ready to receive it. They moved through the burned-out ruins of a city, the dust swirling around their legs as debris hissed in the wind. Mara could feel Thalen's pulse in her chest, and every step they took was synchronized, even though she would never admit it. She had never felt such perfect understanding between two beings before. The bond flared gently when the first patrol appeared. On the ridge, they ducked behind overturned vehicles and rubble. Thalen whispered through the bond, "Do you see how many Mara?" She counted. At least 50 soldiers, human and alien, interspersed their ranks, waiting for the right moment to strike. She nodded and said, "We cannot outrun them. They will surround us before nightfall." He agreed. "Then we fight not to survive, but to teach." The humans fired first bullets, singing past her ears, and Thalen rolled forward, catching 2 soldiers in one sweep. He slammed them into the ground, and the bond pulsed her vision, filling with echoes of his past victories and losses. She felt his grief and his discipline in a single heartbeat. She fired back from cover, picking off marksmen. She could sense the fear in the soldiers through the bond. Not fear of death, but fear of the unknown. Mara whispered, "We have to keep moving." He nodded and dragged her across a shattered plaza. They used the skeleton of a fallen bridge to gain high ground, and for the first time the enemy realized that killing them would not be simple. The bond between them made them impossible to predict. Mara ducked behind a crumbling wall and glanced at Thalen. He was already calculating angles and positions, not with a human brain, but with the intuition of a warrior who had seen centuries of battle in flashes. The bond let her see it too. She could anticipate each strike and each dodge as if their bodies were one. The mid-afternoon sun burned through the dust, casting long shadows across the battlefield. Veil's forces began advancing cautiously. Mara could hear his voice through the bond, a roar of fury and command. He would not allow this bond to exist. He wanted to destroy the proof of unity and make an example. Out of Thalen, she felt her chest tighten, and the bond flared violently, showing her every memory of her failures in command, every convoy she had failed to save the people she had watched die. And now she was afraid she would fail again this time. Thalen's calm entered her mind like a shield, the bond absorbing her panic and returning it with focus the moment slowed. They had seconds to strike before Viel closed the distance. Thalen grabbed a piece of twisted metal from the rubble and tossed it at the advancing patrol. It exploded in a flash of light that blinded their sensors. Mara pushed herself forward, using the moment to climb a fallen pillar and take the high ground, her rifle aimed steadily as Thalen leapt into the fray, striking. With fists and feet crushing armor and morale alike, Mara could feel the bond adjusting their tempo. He felt every heartbeat and every micro-movement of her body, and she felt his pain with each strike. The two of them were impossible to separate. In perception or action, she fired again and again, picking off key targets, slowing the advance and allowing Thalen to create openings. As the sun dipped lower, the enemy realized they could not break the bond by force alone. Mara could sense their hesitation, and she knew the broadcast from the tower had reached every unit. Their deeds had become visible to the world. And now the soldiers began questioning orders. The brigadier's control slipped as murmurs spread. He barked commands, but hesitation grew in the ranks. Mara whispered to Thalen, "The tide is turning." He grinned. "Despite the blood and exhaustion, we move to finish it." She nodded, and they advanced together, crushing the remaining patrols, using strategy, instinct, and the bond between them to dominate without recklessness. But victory came with a cost. Mara felt Thalen's shoulder tear under a sudden strike from Vael himself. The pain flared through her as the bond pulsed violently. She rushed forward, dragging him out of the path of another assault. Vael retreated, but his eyes promised return and revenge. Mara realized that showing the truth had exposed them as targets they could no longer hide. The world had seen the bond, and now all factions would come hunting them. Mara looked at Thalen. His chest heaving but alive, he said, "We cannot stop now, we have to go further." She nodded, understanding that the next hours would define not only their survival but the possibility that humans and giants could remember the unity that had been erased. They found temporary shelter in the remnants of a transport hub, the metal skeleton of broken ships casting long shadows. Mara checked the data core. The files had uploaded to multiple channels and copies were running through secure lines across the war zone. She could feel the ripple of awareness spreading through soldiers. She felt their fear, curiosity, and doubt through the bond. Thalen pressed a hand to her shoulder. Reassuring her, she said, "What now?" He said, "We survive. Tonight and tomorrow we inspire the rest." Mara felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down her limbs, shaking. But the bond flared once more, giving her strength and clarity. She smiled at him and whispered together, "We are more than what they ever imagined," and he responded in his own language she did not understand, but the emotion was clear hope and determination. Night fell over the plains and the wind carried smoke and ash across the ruins. Mara and Thalen crouched in the shadows, preparing for what would come next. They knew the brigadier and Vael would return with reinforcements, and this time the stakes would be higher than ever. The bond pulsed gently in their chests, not only pain or memory but courage. The first step toward changing the war forever. The human soldier and the alien giant had survived the first wave, and they were ready to turn the tide and show the world that unity could exist, even in the heart of war. The night was cold and heavy over the ruins of the battlefield. Mara Cade crouched behind the wreckage of a burned transport. Her breath forming clouds in the thin air. She could feel Thalen beside her through the bond, his massive frame pressed against the shadows of the collapsed structure. They had survived the ambush, but the victory was fleeting. Every sound in the distance made her pulse quicken, and the wind carried the faint echo of soldiers moving like ghosts. She gripped her rifle tighter and tried to focus on the rhythm of the bond, drawing courage from Thalen's presence, yet she could feel the exhaustion in his muscles and the ache of old wounds pulsing through her own body, as if the pain belonged to both of them. They had moved for days through the shattered cities and scarred plains, hiding from reinforcements sent to hunt them. Mara could sense the hunt was relentless. The brigadier had labeled her a traitor, and Vael had marked Thalen as dishonored blood. She felt the weight of every eye watching them through satellite and scout drones. Every step forward was shadowed by the knowledge that capture or death could come at any moment. They had no allies left to trust, and the bond that had kept them alive also amplified every fear and every doubt. Mara whispered into the quiet, "Do we even know who to trust anymore?" Thalen's reply came not in words, but as a pulse of reassurance mixed with sorrow, yet she could feel his own uncertainty beneath the surface. The bond pulsed again as they entered the ruins of an old industrial complex. The place smelled of oil and rusted metal. The corridors twisted like a labyrinth. Mara led the way, carefully scanning every corner, while Thalen followed silently, his massive shadow stretching across the walls. She could feel his patience, and his calculation through the bond. Yet there was also a strain she had not felt before his memories of past battles and losses pressed on her mind. She could see the echoes of entire units lost to misjudgment and greed, and she understood now that surviving this night meant more than avoiding bullets. It meant surviving the weight of history pressing down on them both. They found a small chamber partially intact. Mara could feel the air thick with old power. Val could not accept this display of unity. Mara felt his fury as a sharp pulse through the connection, and she knew he would attempt a strike. She whispered, "We need a trap." He responded with a flare of the bond, indicating he had already calculated the positions of his forces. They moved in tandem, guiding soldiers unwittingly into positions where they could not harm innocents. Mara fired suppressive shots while Thalen physically blocked the enemy, the bond translating his strength into her movements, the pulse of coordination carrying her through exhaustion and fear. The signal continued to beam the data core images and proofs across the war zone, every unit receiving the evidence of cooperation and past peace. Suddenly a squad led by Vel charged. Mara could feel the wind shift through the bond, the pulse of aggression transmitted directly into her awareness. She glanced at Thalen, and he was already moving, a wall of motion shielding her as she climbed to a higher platform. To adjust the transmitter, he rolled through the charge, catching 2 soldiers and sending them tumbling. Mara could feel the strain in his body, yet the bond relayed focus, strength, and timing, allowing her to coordinate sniper fire, taking out key leaders without endangering innocents. The pulse of the bond was a rhythm of survival, strategy, and hope. The brigadier attempted a precision strike. Mara could sense the incoming drones, and the pulse of anticipation flared sharply through the bond. She adjusted the transmitter and sent a decoy signal while Thalen intercepted the drones, physically throwing them off course. Every move synchronized. Mara felt the feedback from the bond like a living entity. The battlefield slowed in perception, allowing them to manipulate positions and protect the lives they could while exposing the commander's failures to the watching soldiers. The tide had turned. The hesitation she felt earlier blossomed into cautious trust. The pulse of coordination, spreading beyond them to every soldier able to perceive it. Hours passed. Mara and Thalen moved relentlessly, guiding the rhythm of survival and caution across the standoff plain, the signal reaching every screen, every unit, every command post, showing images of shared banners and oaths, the ancient murals and evidence of cooperation. Humans and giants fighting side by side long before the current conflict. Mara could feel the bond pulsing with pride and hope. The world was beginning to see what they had always known: unity was possible. The soldiers began lowering weapons, some taking cover and observing rather than firing, the pulse of the bond like a heartbeat across the battlefield, teaching patience and courage without a word. By sunset, the standoff plain had transformed from chaos to tense anticipation. Mara and Thalen crouched together, the transmitter still glowing, the bond pulsing with rhythm and shared satisfaction. They had not fired to kill unnecessarily, but their presence had altered the perception of the entire theater. Every soldier aware that a human and an alien giant could act together, not as enemies, but as a single, coordinated force. Mara whispered softly into the bond. "We did it." He pressed his massive hand against hers, the pulse steady with pride and agreement. Yet the bond warned that this was only the beginning. Reinforcements and retaliation would come. Mara looked out across the battlefield, knowing the next day would demand even greater courage. Yet with Thalen beside her, she felt the certainty of survival and the unshakable power of unity. The plane fell into a quiet that was almost unnatural. Mara and Thalen crouched among the ruins, the bond pulsing gently as the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows stretching long across the field. The world had seen their proof of unity. The pulse of courage and shared determination carried across the armies, and even in exhaustion, Mara could feel the hope threading through the connection. The bond was no longer just survival. It was teaching patience, strategy, and trust, preparing them for the final trials that would determine whether humans and giants could truly coexist as one force, and whether the courage of a single human soldier and an 8-foot alien giant could change the course of war forever. The battlefield had quieted under the dim glow of twilight. Mara Cade crouched beside Thalen, feeling the pulse of the bond thrumming through both of them like a living heartbeat. Their bodies exhausted, muscles aching, yet their minds sharp and synchronized. The signal from the transmitter had reached every corner of the theater. Every soldier now aware of the truth of the ancient alliance, yet the danger had not passed. Mara could sense Vial's fury like a storm moving across the field. The rival, Warlord, had gathered a kill squad with precision-trained soldiers and advanced war machines. Through the bond, she could feel Thalen's own tension, the weight of honor and survival pressing on him as his massive hand rested lightly against hers, a silent promise that they would face the oncoming storm together. Mara's pulse matched his, steadying, preparing, calculating. The first wave struck as darkness deepened, the roar of engines and weapons filling the air, shadows racing across the plains as soldiers and alien warriors moved into attack formation. Mara and Thalen had anticipated this. The bond had given them insight into both human and alien tactics, their shared memories and instincts acting as a living map. She fired suppressive rounds from cover, careful not to waste bullets, while Thalen smashed through enemy ranks with the force of a tidal wave, his massive frame protecting her from direct assault. Mara felt the shock of every impact he absorbed, through the bond, translating his strength into her own perception of the battlefield, and she adjusted her fire with precision. Every shot, every movement, every choice was synchronized in a rhythm born of trust and shared survival. Vial himself appeared, leading a small group of elite warriors, his black armor reflecting the dim light of the broken sun. Mara felt the surge of aggression through the bond, the raw intensity of the warlord's desire to destroy the bond, to erase the proof of unity. She whispered into Thalen's mind, "We face him together," and the bond flared like fire, amplifying their courage. Thalen roared, a sound that vibrated through the plains, drawing the attention of both sides. Mara saw the hesitation in soldiers, on either side as the bond pulsed outward, conveying unity, focus, and a rhythm of restraint. No human or alien wanted to strike them recklessly when they could see what this bond represented. Thalen moved first, charging Vial with a force that shattered the ground beneath him. Mara climbed to higher ground, using the pulse of the bond to guide her aim and anticipate openings. She fired at incoming squads targeting Thalen, striking with precision to disable rather than kill, her mind perfectly synchronized with the alien giant's movements. Vial swung with fury, each blow sending tremors through Thalen and rippling into Mara's awareness. She felt the pain, the strain, yet the bond translated it into clarity, teaching her where to adjust, when to strike, when to retreat. The battlefield slowed in perception, every moment stretching, every heartbeat aligned across human and alien alike. The duel with Vial reached the center of the plain, each clash of fists and blades sending shockwaves through the ground. Mara saw the kill squad attempting to flank them, and without thinking she moved with Thalen as one, intercepting their attack, turning their aggression into openings for precision strikes. Every soldier who hesitated felt the weight of the bond, the rhythm of coordination that Mara and Thalen had created through pain, endurance, and mutual trust. The bond pulsed brighter, a beacon of unity, and even the most hardened warriors began to see not an enemy, but an example of cooperation and shared purpose. Vial faltered, rage overtaking calculation, and Thalen pinned him to the ground yet did not strike the finishing blow. Mara could feel the strain of holding the bond steady, but through it, she sensed the silent lesson Thalen was teaching. Strength without restraint is meaningless. Vial struggled, shouting, and Mara saw the shock in the soldiers watching him, the realization that the power of this human and alien pair did not require slaughter to succeed. She fired the remaining flares to signal surrender and secure observation, the battlefield now a tableau of quiet tension and awe. The brigadier's drones hovered uselessly, the command structure unraveling as field officers witnessed what Mara and Thalen had accomplished. They had saved hundreds of lives without indiscriminate bloodshed, proving that coordination, trust, and courage could outweigh orders rooted in fear and vengeance. Mara could feel the bond pulsing gently, conveying relief and pride yet warning her that vigilance was still necessary. She moved toward Thalen, placing a hand against his armored chest, feeling his massive heartbeat through the bond and knowing they had survived not by strength alone but by the unity they embodied. In the aftermath, soldiers from both factions began approaching cautiously, lowering weapons, their faces a mixture of disbelief and hope. Mara and Thalen stood together in the center of the plain, the data from the transmitter still streaming, to every display, evidence of the ancient alliance visible for all to see. Mara addressed the crowd without words, the bond translating her intent, the rhythm of courage and purpose resonating across the gathered warriors. Slowly, murmurs of agreement and tentative trust spread, soldiers lowering rifles, some stepping forward, willing to consider cooperation rather than slaughter. Vael was removed by his remaining men, humiliated yet alive, the lesson clear that the bond was not simply a weapon of force but a demonstration of what could be achieved when courage, empathy, and trust guided action. The brigadier was relieved of command as field officers refused to target Mara and Thalen, understanding that their survival and leadership were crucial to the fragile peace now emerging. Mara and Thalen, exhausted but undiminished, surveyed the plain, their bond steady, conveying strength, hope, and the certainty that their actions had changed the course of history. Months later, Mara and Thalen were seen training new recruits in combined human and alien units, soldiers practicing the lessons learned from the bond, working together across species, learning to anticipate, cooperate, and trust one another. The scars of war remained, the memories of battle etched into both bodies and minds, yet the bond persisted, a living reminder of the courage and vision of a single human soldier and an 8-foot alien giant. Mara could feel the pulse of life, purpose and unity flowing through them and the bond, spreading outward into a new generation of warriors prepared to face any threat with courage and cooperation. The sun rose over the training grounds, casting long shadows across the plains. Mara standing beside Thalen, feeling the rhythm of their shared heartbeat, knowing that whatever dangers lay ahead, whatever wars might come, the bond they had forged would answer first, and that the courage of humanity paired with the strength of the alien giant had proven that even in a universe scarred by conflict, unity, and hope could prevail. The end. The mining moon had been quiet for 3 days, and that silence felt like a trap to every soldier breathing recycled air in the dark tunnels. But to Mara Cade, it felt like a promise of something about to break. She moved with her rifle, low-stepping, over cracked stone and pale dust that glowed under her helmet light. The comms buzzed with nervous voices telling her to fall back. The ceasefire had failed again. The aliens were regrouping on the ridge, but her orders were to confirm the relay. Tunnel was clear. She reached the end of the corridor and stopped because the air itself seemed to hold its breath from the shadows ahead. Came a sound like metal dragged across sand, slow and heavy. She raised her weapon and called out standard. Warning, no answer. Only the echo, and then the shape appeared. An 8-foot giant, armor-scorched chest, heaving his right hand empty, his left dragging a broken spear. His eyes glowed dim blue through a cracked visor, and when he spoke, his voice rolled. Through the tunnel like distant thunder, his language was translated a heartbeat later through her visor. He said no. Fight no more. Fight. Mara kept the aim steady, thinking he was trying to trick her. They were enemies. His kind had killed her squadmates 3 weeks ago near the refinery. But there was something in the way he knelt. Instead of charging, he pressed one fist to the ground and said bond. The word hit her like a spark. She knew it from briefings, the alien oath ritual. Something ancient. Between their warrior castes, a shared life vow meant to fuse strength and honor through a mental link no human had ever accepted one not, and survived it long. The command manual called it a myth and a trap. But Mara heard the word echo in her skull. Bond, she whispered, and the giant looked up, his eyes meeting hers through cracked glass. His next words chilled her. He said, Mara Cade, your name carved in courage. She froze. He knew her name. How she didn't know, no alien should know that. And yet, when she asked how he spoke her name, he said, I saw it in the bond dream. The old light chose you. The comm screamed in her ear, command ordering retreat and containment, but she lowered her weapon against instinct. She saw that the giant was bleeding, dark fluid leaking down his arm, and his armor plates cracked like stone after fire. She had been trained to eliminate wounded enemies, but she couldn't move. The words, bond and name, tangled together in her chest, as if the tunnel itself had turned. Into a pulse Thalen, that was his name, he told her when she asked. The translator picked it up as Thalen of the First Brood. Mara said the war is over for neither of us. If I help you, I become the enemy to my own. He said then we are both already alone. The moment stretched, the ceiling trembled with distant bombardment. Dust fell like ash, and she thought of the dead she left behind. She thought of what kind of courage it took to kneel before an enemy knowing they might shoot. She holstered the rifle and stepped closer. The translator blinked red, trying to process the formal phrase as Thalen raised his uninjured hand. His palm bore a carved sigil, glowing faint blue. He said, "Speak your name to the vow." She hesitated, then said, "Mara Cade, soldier of Earth Defense." The air turned cold. A vibration shivered through the floor and the walls. The light pulsed once, twice, then sank into both their chests, a burning that felt like ice cutting through her spine. She gasped, falling forward, and he caught her with one massive hand, steady as stone. "The bond is made," he said. The alarms began to howl through the comms. Intrusion breach detection. The system had registered the strange energy pattern. Command shouted abort and extraction now, but Mara couldn't answer because her mind was filled with images that weren't hers. She saw flashes of a world of crystal fields, of giants standing in circles chanting to the storm. She saw Thalen's memory of his brood, small figures playing in rain. She smelled the air of another planet, felt the grief of a soldier who had lost everything. Then her own thoughts answered back, and she knew he could see her memories too. Her childhood, her squad, the day she froze at the checkpoint and lost, her team. She tried to pull back, but the bond would not release. It wasn't pain exactly, but it was truth, raw and unhidden. Thalen said softly, "The bond cannot be undone unless one dies." Mara caught her breath. The comms were gone. She could still hear them, but faint, as if through water. Then a blast rocked the tunnel. The alien artillery had found the ridge. The shockwave knocked her down. He pulled her up with one hand as if she weighed nothing. "Come, we must move." She nodded, even though her heart raced. Every step after that felt strange. She could sense his rhythm, his heartbeat like a low drum behind her thoughts. Their footsteps synced without trying. They moved through smoke and heat, crawling through narrow shafts. And when debris blocked the path, he shoved the stones aside with one brutal swing of his shoulder. Outside, the horizon burned orange under twin suns, and ships screamed overhead. A human gunship scanned the ruins. Mara waved, but the ship turned its guns toward them, she realized. Too late that command had already tagged her as compromised. Thalen grabbed her and pulled her into cover as missiles slammed into the ground where they stood. The blast threw sand and fire around them. She could feel his pain in her body, the way his muscles tore when shrapnel hit his side. She screamed without sound, but his hand closed over hers and steadied her. The bond shared endurance. She could feel his strength holding her together. When the smoke cleared, the world was a storm of flame, and Glass. Thalen's breathing was ragged but steady. He said, "They will hunt you now," and she said, "They will hunt you too." He nodded and said, "Then we are bonded by truth, not war." Mara looked out at the ruined valley where both armies had burned, and for the first time since she landed on this moon, she felt something like clarity. The war had no shape, only faces and choices, and she had just made hers behind them. The comms still hissed with static human voices calling her a defector. She switched them off and said quietly to Thalen, "If this bond kills us, at least it will mean something," he answered. "It will mean we tried to become more than what we were together." They walked into the storm of dust and burning sky, and the bond pulsed once, more like a heartbeat shared by two species now. One path, one vow, one uncertain beginning. They walked for hours across the shattered plain where glassed sand crunched under their boots and the air shimmered with heat from buried reactors. The bond still thrummed faint in the back of Mara's skull like a second pulse. Thalen moved beside her, silent. Except for the heavy sound of his breathing every few steps, she caught herself matching it. Without meaning to, it was strange to feel another presence inside her thoughts, not as a voice but as a rhythm of images and emotions. She could taste his exhaustion, see brief flashes of his world, the scent of rain on crystal, the weight of command that had once been his and now was gone. She tried to block it out, But every time she did, the bond tugged harder as if demanding she not look away. They found shelter in a half-collapsed maintenance dome, where the walls hummed with broken power. Thalen lifted what was left of a blast door and set it across the entrance while she scavenged for anything that could be turned into light or heat. She found a cracked solar cell, a ration pack, 2 water pouches, and an old emergency lamp that flickered to life in her hand. The pale glow spilled across the room, showing the alien's enormous frame, his armor stripped off one side, revealing muscle, like braided steel covered in dark wounds. Mara's soldier instincts kicked in. She tore open her medkit and moved closer without asking permission. He watched her every motion as she cleaned the burns and pressed sealant patches to the cuts each time her hand touched his skin. The bond shimmered, showing flashes of his memories. She saw the moment his unit was destroyed by orbital fire and the way he refused to retreat, carrying a wounded comrade until the blast buried them both. She pulled back, shaking. He said softly, "The bond shows truth. You cannot hide what you are, and neither can I." She looked away and said, "I didn't ask to see your past." He replied, "Neither did I, but now we share it, and maybe that is what will keep us alive." They sat in silence for a long while, the dome rattling with distant thunder. Mara finally asked, "What happens if we go back?" He looked at her, the blue in his eyes dim but steady, and said, "Your commanders will put you in a lab. My warlords will do the same. Only difference is whose scalpel cuts first." She laughed bitterly. "So we run forever," he said, "until we find a way to make this mean more than fear." The next morning she woke to find him outside, standing perfectly still, scanning the horizon. His posture so alert it made her grip her rifle without thinking. He said, "Someone is coming." She moved beside him using her scope and saw a cluster of lights moving fast, ground transport, maybe 5 or 6 human signals. The relief hit her for a moment. She almost smiled. "Rescue," she whispered. But Thalen didn't relax. His echo sense rippled through the air like a vibration, and his expression turned grim. "Not rescue hunters." His tone was certain. She raised the scope again and saw the insignia on the lead vehicle. Not command colors, but a black cell logo, the kind of group that didn't report to anyone official. They captured tech and people both. They had only minutes. She grabbed her gear while Thalen tore open a hidden hatch leading to a maintenance shaft too narrow for him. He looked at her and said, "Go." She shook her head. "Not without you." He glanced at the sky and said, "Then, we fight together." The bond flared like light across her vision. She could feel his battle calm settle over her heart, slowing her panic when the vehicle stopped outside and the soldiers dismounted. She and Thalen waited in the half-light.